Hello and welcome to the XPRT Community Live stream. We had some technical difficulties, but everything is working now. This is our third show. Today we're going to talk about serverless. Serverless on Azure, AWS, Google. Well, here are your hosts, Jasper, René and me, Geert. Today we have some special guests. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Marc Duiker. I'm a consultant for XPRT, and I focus a lot on event-driven architectures and a lot of serverless technologies.
Yeah, my name is Kenny Baas Marc Duiker. I'm part of CBA, which is also part of XPRT, or the other way around. I'm a consultant mostly focused on quality and building quality in software. And I do that. Serverless is a nice way to just create more business value faster.
Okay, so well, in this 30-minute show, what we're going to do is we will start with some challenges for the two of you. We just ask you to answer with yes or no, or choose one of the options, and after that you get some time to elaborate on why you would choose that answer. And you can both answer all of the challenges. So, René?
Yeah, warning up front. We are all consultants, and it depends is not a valid answer. So the first statement, because the session title here was Serverless Battle. So let us directly start with the question that is on top of everybody's minds. What is the best one? AWS, Google, or Azure? Mark?
Of course, I'm biased, but if you take into account the whole developer experience, I'm leaning towards Azure.
Okay.
I'm less biased. For now,
You don't have the shirt?
for now, I would. Top of my mind is Google at the moment. They're going fast and they have some pretty nice, neat. They're not there, but I would definitely pick Google just out of curiosity.
Okay, and what would you say is the killer feature then in Google? Why you choose Google?
The portal.
Okay.
The whole portal experience is a lot better. You can create. I like the projects in Google. You can create a project for a team, so that already gives you a boundary. Well, people who know me, I'm a DDDer, so bounded context is really important for me. So it already gives you a solid boundary in which you can work and move your projects. In AWS, which I have the most experience in, you don't really have it. All the functions just floats in the cloud for everyone, and you can manage that sort of, but it's not the way you want it.
Okay.
Yeah, in Azure, those are boundaries are resource groups, which are again a nice way of isolating. But
Okay, second one. Stateless or stateful?
yeah, preferably stateless, but stateful also have good options. Yeah.
Preferably stateless.
Why?
Because it's easier, or
It's easier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just less things to worry about.
In DDD, I always say you rather have a value object over a aggregator entity, because value objects are so much simpler.
So when do we need state? So can it be always stateless, or?
No,
Definitely not.
no. When you have a consistent business rule, for instance, someone sitting in a seat and you give away one seat per person, then you need to know which seats are being taken already, so you have state. So a seat is in a sort of state machine transition, right? It's either empty, it's reserved, or confirmed. Well,
Yeah.
there are people who can say with events you can do it. I haven't seen it really.
Would make it too complicated to.
Yeah.
And looking at the different cloud providers, is there a big difference in state or stateless opportunities there, or is it merely the same?
Not so much. I think all the big cloud providers have a similar flavor of all of the offerings, be it functions as a service or also storage offerings. They offer more or less the same thing, so that's not really what differentiates them.
Okay.
Okay. So some lighter weight, Netflix or Spotify?
Spotify for me.
For me, Netflix.
Ah.
Just because I generally hate the Spotify model by now in organizations. I both use them, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for you?
For me, it's more like consuming. I consume much more music than I consume series, so that's why.
True for me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, we asked this at different guests as well, and I think it's funny to see that most of them are either choosing the obvious choice of I consume more music, and the other ones are I don't like the Spotify model, or I like how Netflix does technology. That I like that approach.
Yeah, it's really biased to the technology stuff, and I think that if you ask any consumer outside of this premise, they will say, "Oh, I don't care."
Exactly.
And we are talking about agile models and music.
Yep.
Okay, so what are there is really a trend in containers. Of course, everybody's doing containers. Microsoft is doing everything in containers. Google is really hot on containers, and then there is functions. So I think the choice for you guys is obvious since you're doing the serverless stuff. But functions or containers?
Ooh, yeah. For me, it will be functions, not containers. But you see more and more that worlds are also aligning there. So it's not so black and white.
Okay.
Yeah, I would generally want to pick functions, but I think it's not there yet, maturity, in order to build really complex models in. So I would still pick containers, as long as people don't throw Kubernetes at me, I'm fine. It doesn't solve business problems for me.
So
and it has its space, but not for me.
So functions and Kubernetes is also...
I hope I don't need to meddle with Kubernetes.
Serverless Kubernetes.
I just want to create something businessy and have the least technical
Exactly. That's
complexity as
ideal
possible.
situation.
That's the promise of serverless, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to think about servers anymore.
Not that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
It still is there,
Yeah.
but
You have to think about serverless.
Yeah.
Right? That's
so less technical
exactly.
complexity.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
true.
then we can go into the first one. DynamoDB is far too many technical complexity for me at the moment. So yeah,
I
the
think
promise isn't there yet. It's not.
okay. Yeah.
I think it's a nice lead into the next one. That functions. Do you think it's an in-between solution towards something else, which we don't know yet? Everything is, of course, but is it, or is this something that we are really using in the future, in the nearby future? Is this
the new
sort-
paradigm.
Is this the new thing that we are doing all in 10 years time or something?
I can definitely see staying with functions for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, I can't see too much into the future, so I don't really know what comes next to it. But yeah, I think the granularity it offers is really nice. And with respect to containers, then you still have to manage the orchestration or configuration more than you have to do with really functions as is. So yeah, I would bet my money more on the functions side than on the container side. So.
Yeah, I would love, although one paradigm at the moment I'm most interested in is the actor model. Only the frameworks I've seen, it's not everyone, you still need a lot of technical stuff, like Kubernetes again, like Kafka, like all these. And with function I have less of that, so I like to have it more focus on business than on technical complexity. So for now, I think functions will definitely.
Are there any serverless providers that do actors well currently, or
Not that I know of. No.
Okay.
Not that I know, but I'm not an expert on that field. There are some very interesting tooling available, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, one of the things I see when I see serverless, I see it used a lot in quite small applications, like these small tools where we have to really bursty loads or really unpredictable load, but complex business application, I don't see it used there that much yet. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, well, I see it definitely being used more and more, but it really depends how can you cut up your business logic into smaller chunks and work within this bounded context that Kenny already mentioned. And it also depends how is your architecture. Is it really event driven that you do some piece of compute and then you push to a storage and then you can have another process pick something up from the storage? And when you have these cut points in your architecture, then you can do really more complex stuff while the solutions stay relatively small. So I see it really working with the clients I'm working now.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can work, and I also like the event source part, so temporal modeling and everything. But when I look at serverless, it can be done. But if you look at a lot of these frameworks that already exist, in order to do all these things that you need, serverless isn't there yet. So you have these in Java, you have these frameworks, Axon, Lagom. They empower you already in building faster event source application. If you want to build it on a serverless platform with functions, you need to do a lot still by yourself. Or there's a spectrum probably I didn't see yet, or there's already frameworks, but they're probably not mature enough. Yeah. So it's for me it's still the maturity.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that you talk a lot on conferences together or separate from each other. So one of the things that I know that you talk about is orchestration. So and maybe other things. Can you talk a little bit about? So what is your view on how to orchestrate all these functions and the things monitoring around it? So what do you talk about in your session, and can you dive into it that a little bit?
Yeah, that was definitely also why we got together indeed, because we were both talking about how do you deal with multiple functions and how do they interact and stuff. And yeah, within Azure you have durable functions, which is a really nice fit into this. So if you want to need a certain sequence of function, or if you want to fan out your functions and then fan back in to do some aggregation on your data, that fits really well within durable functions. And yeah, we were curious how well does this map to AWS and also Google.
Yeah, you were talking about durable functions, and I was working on AWS, and I said,
What's that? Yeah.
So I started looking, and in AWS you have something called step functions, and now someone told me last conference they have a SDK for it. But by original it was all in JSON or YAML configuration, and for me orchestration is really dangerous because orchestrating stuff can couple stuff. And I generally dislike, I hope everyone should say we need to be loosely coupled. So again, I come with the bounded context, and within a bounded context, orchestration is fine, but not over bounded context or not over microservices, preferably not. Maybe the danger is coupling. That's why in Google we found out there's no orchestration yet. I'm not sure if they're gonna do it, but there's a lot of danger, and especially in AWS, the danger is. It felt like for people who've seen it, so I come from a Java background, you had the early adoption of Spring, where every bean, so every injection, you need to fill in XML. So if you make a typo, it starts and it fails again. It fails again. So the feedback loop is really long. Well, that's why if you do orchestration at the moment, and that's what we said in our talk, you really need to go to Azure, because the durable functions are so much matured compared to, at least AWS, Google doesn't have it.
So how would you go?
I really like the programmatic one of what I've seen from you at least.
So how would you make sure you have a valid testing strategy for those things? Because you say sometimes it's error prone to trigger them, or how do you do in a business context testing of those small functions? What's your take on that?
So for me, it's I generally like, so there's no silver bullet point, right? But I generally like to use the hexagonal architecture, or now it's called ports and adapters, where you move every technical complexity to the side, and within tools like event storming or example mapping, where you can explore how your model needs to behave, what it needs to do, you can get examples that what your model needs to do. And you can create really nice, rigorous tests around your domain model, and then dive in deep, so that then it's contained. So if you approach it in a domain modeling way first, and that's what we also talk about, you still need to do domain modeling. It gets easier, but the combination is really powerful. So I think then it's a lot better. And in AWS, the step function are outside, or you can put it inside your code, but it's not connected, because it's
more configuration.
It's more configuration, and within durable functions you can just use
unit test it.
You can unit test it, and you can create tests for it, and I think that's the most important part. So now I haven't tried the Java SDK in AWS, but I think that's the most important part. It needs to be easily testable, that you can get feedback within preferably seconds. And for orchestration, that's what Azure does. What I've seen. But
for basic functions, it's just a unit test, right? Because a function is just a unit.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And what I find hard to grasp with the whole functions part, and especially when you talk about the business applications, where I understand the stuff, pick up something from a queue, process something, and just push it back or do something.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have an orchestration of functions, so we have a business process with a lot of different things that need to happen, and you choose a serverless architecture for that. So if you talk about, for example, if we call it a product, so the product contains, like, let's say 50 functions, and they all do something together.
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage that in terms of life cycle, deployments, testing end to end? So that, because I understand that one function, but that orchestration of functions that you have to deploy as a whole, maybe. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's also quite a big difference between the cloud providers, because in Azure you have a concept of a function app, which is already a logical grouping of several functions. And I'm always advising, okay, and make that grouping, make it small, so don't put maybe 50 functions in one function app, but make sure your bounded context is a function app, so maybe it contains like 6 or 7 functions which work together in an orchestration, and you can have several function apps then. But in AWS and also in Google, it's quite different. You really have just one function is your deployable unit. So then it becomes a bit.
You can still deploy them together, right?
Sure. Yeah, but it's a bit more work to do it.
Yeah.
What I've actually been experimenting with is the ports and adapters again. I make my business model just in plain TypeScript or Java or C#. And I push the serverless technology to where it should be in the adapter layer, an infra layer. So in that infra layer, I can actually create a Google function, an AWS function, or a Azure function, and just call the model itself. So I'm trying to, and when I got time, I'll try to make one app with 3 different functions and deploy it to Azure, Google, and just to show how easy it is to decouple it with the ports and adapters. But then when you put in orchestration again, that's...
in terms of versioning, for example, if you deploy one function, you should at least know that it doesn't break other stuff. Maybe they are dependent and you don't want dependencies, but sometimes you cannot do without dependencies because they call each other. So it's already so hard with just simple web application and a web API to keep that up to date. So
how does that scale to?
To
50
functions?
So less orchestration is better, in my opinion. And if you really do correctly, again, the ports and adapters with the examples on the outside, where you just first rigorously test your domain model, then I don't care what functions come in. It's the only orchestration that's a problem, but maybe your orchestration should be more inside, but then you're going to join durable functions with your domain model, and I'm not sure how that works yet. It's not something I generally don't do, but I dislike putting frameworks in my core model. So I haven't tried it that rigorously yet.
And also, if you split it up a lot, so you do a lot of async stuff with queues in between, then it's also becoming really hard to manage, I guess, because there's stuff everywhere.
Yeah, also monitoring and traceability gets increasingly difficult. That certainly is true.
So I would always start, same with microservices, same with everything, start with just functions and see at some point, within DDD we call these, I think it was modules, if you have certain parts you can cut out and then use the orchestration on that part maybe, right? So
would you have functions call other functions then, or would you always put some stuff in between?
Depends on the patterns.
Right?
So you can have a domain service.
The thing we mentioned it, so like you said, you have the concept of a module. So you could do anything within the module. So you can have an orchestration within the module for different functions. But definitely don't. Ideally, don't do any cross.
Don't overstep your boundaries.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's all about the design phase, and if you're conscious about making that decision to do orchestration, but first try other options. There, in DDD we have a saying: first try 2 different models, because if those 2 models don't work, then at least you know you have the better model, because there's no one way to do it. There's 100 ways. You just need to find the better one.
Okay, we talk about functions a lot. Well, if you look at serverless, maybe take a step back. Is serverless only functions, or how do you define serverless? Because it's often serverless people only talk about functions, but
True.
is that everything, or how do you see
No,
it?
in my opinion, it's much more than that. It's the whole, let's say, concept of not having to worry too much about configuration or management or the operations part of it. So one part is functions, but the other part we already mentioned briefly is storage. Things can also like API management. It can be a lot of cloud services on which you can use very easily, but perhaps need little control over.
So would you call a software as a service, or would you call that a serverless then as well?
It fits my definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's again, like everything, language is hard, and So the first paradigm was, of course, the gateway and the database, but I think AWS. But I'm not up to par with everything. But at some point they had serverless containers. But I don't want to get into the discussion of what's the word. The thing that in my opinion is trying to solve is that I don't need IP address, or I don't need.
Okay, but I hear people talking about serverless Kubernetes now. So
it's of course very much a popular marketing term as well. So if you want to be a player, then you just put serverless in front of it.
And serverless Kubernetes, then you have
as well as Kubernetes.
As well as
combination,
Kubernetes.
right?
There's this great comic, not sure which comic it was, where you see this guy coming into to a server room and looks at all the servers and shout, "You see, they're servers. What is this serverless bullshit? This is not serverless." And the IT guys know. So it's still someone else's machine. I just want to go up a paradigm where I don't need to worry even more about.
So
here's my
The
app.
concept
Just
of a
run
machine
it.
is gone, right?
The concept of a machine is gone. Here's my app.
Yeah.
Just make sure that when I want it, that it runs.
Yeah, and I think those definitions for serverless are also different between all the cloud providers, right? I think Microsoft used to use serverless only for like functions, and Amazon from the start they already had DynamoDB and those kinds of things called serverless as well.
Right.
And I think now Microsoft's also moving our
serverless
storage
SQL
is also serverless, and
exactly.
It's just less configuration. Like in DynamoDB, you just put in some configuration and you ask it, and that's what I like. You just say, okay, I need a table. Just give me a table, and it has this capacity, read, write, and there's configuration. But in my serverless app, I just say, I give an environment variable that says this is a table name, and it looks up. Oh, there's a table name. I'm just using it. I don't need to do these all of resource configuration. It just figures it out. And
and also like
for me,
the
that's
level of integration is neat very
Yeah.
nicely with all the cloud providers.
Yeah.
That's really.
and that's
really
the
easy.
danger again, because you get locked up. But
Maybe
I
I see the danger more that maybe sometimes it's too easy to get started with certain services, regardless of cloud provider, and that you maybe think a bit too less about the whole architecture. So maybe you are coupling a very scalable function with a not so scalable backend or something, and then you run into issues.
and your proof of concept is in production instantly.
So
So it's already there.
Yeah.
While you want to remove the proof of concept,
Yeah.
but it's already in the cloud.
so providing business value.
About running in production. So, for example, also monitoring. How do you deal with that?
So monitoring for me, already going to microservices, monitoring is the thing you need to have in place from day one.
Yeah.
It's the de facto the most important thing, and serverless or exactly functions. Well, it's already there, but you need to have proper monitoring, and not only monitoring on a lower level, but also on a business level.
So which functions are executed, which events are
Especially
executed, those,
So for functions, it's already out of the box usually. It's quite good. But
it is also with application insights in Azure, but sometimes there's still some tricky parts like application insights does sampling of all your events, so you might not see all your events in your log. So sometimes you're a bit off, or you not really can make the right decision because you're just missing some events which tend to be crucial. So
and it's still on the low part, right? How many times did the function run? How long did it run? How much did it cost? But the most important part of monitoring is still what business capabilities or what business process did it hit.
Excellent.
That's the most important part about microservices, about functions. What is it it's solving?
Are we
I
still
think
selling those
it's
seats?
becoming more and more important, right? When we had these big monoliths, it was quite easy, right?
Yeah.
Monitoring. It was also monitoring the server. It was just
It's more
easy
like
because
either
it's
on or
one
off,
thing.
and that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it works
now
now.
you have so
now it's like
yeah.
somewhere in this big orchestration stuff might go wrong. So
But it's also very important that we can translate that to people that don't understand. I got a question last time that someone asked me how to install the agent on the platform on the PaaS. So I said, well, you can't because we don't have a server. So it is something it all shifts. And it's something that it's really hard to grasp, and the tooling is not always up to date, especially in the larger enterprises.
And that's why things like SRE, right? Reliability engineer is so important. And now that I come back to your previous question about Netflix or Spotify, Netflix actually has, I think, one of the first jobs for a reliability engineer. And we need to also go away from the robustness while the code freezing and try to be certain that it will work. No, try to develop code so that it is resilient, so that it can.
Because it will fail anyway.
It will fail anyway. Complex system is always near failure. So that, Netflix also did it for me. Software reliability engineering. And that's an important part. If you want to do more of these paradigms, the soft skills and the level of soft skills and domain modeling, designing increases. It's easier to put something to production, but that's also the really danger.
Exactly.
And also a concept that Netflix uses is like full cycle developers. So there's no dev and ops. There's just a dev team that's responsible for everything. The SRE guys are only when the shit really hits the fan and the team cannot solve it itself, or the underlying platform is something broken. So I think that's also really important for functions because it's mainly your code, right? It's
exactly. You should be the owner of it and also how it runs in production, and you should know what should happen in case it goes wrong, and you should take that into account already. So
there's this. I'm not sure. Jessica Kerr brought it up. It's called SIMATES. It's learning together. So as a team, you need to learn together, and learn together is the whole system. So it's the functions that are running, it's the machines that's running, it's the domain knowledge. So it's really nice. The word SIMATES really, really flies with that. And else you come. What we say in our talk is, you used to have in a monolith you had you had spaghetti code. Now you have flying spaghetti functions if you're not careful. I've seen people just
that's worse, right?
Exactly.
Because they're in the cloud.
You get really messy quickly.
Everywhere.
So the real problem there is what we've seen is that people make repository per function, and at some point you don't know. Okay, so who does this function belong to, and where does it all connect? So that's the SIMATES, right? We need to have a state of mind where we know if I touch this, then this will happen, and that's continuous engineering, right? It's just one engineering team, and everyone has a specialty. That's fine, but everyone knows what's going on. So we need to get out of our sandboxes.
Do you think it requires a different skill set for developers compared to working on monoliths? Does it require? Is it because I hear you say there's a lot of because it's so fine grained. There's a lot of complexity.
Yeah.
So,
documentation won't help you here anymore.
No.
And nobody reads it anyway. Wiki has the place documentation dies. That was it.
But you shouldn't be afraid to experiment at least, right? You shouldn't be afraid to put also failing stuff out there because it will fail anyway. But but you should also be, let's say, also resilient then as a developer and make sure you give a full mile when shit hit the fan.
It also goes. You can go faster, but the thing is, you need to collaborate more. You need to work more as a team. So that does mean, and I'm a huge fan of trunk-based development. That doesn't mean I don't do branches, but I don't want people working alone in a branch for a long time, because then you're disconnected with your team. It's all about continuous is the word. Like, we need to continuous discover what's going on. If something hits the fan somewhere, okay, let's do mob programming. Let's figure out, let's do a post-mortem maybe, but as a team. and I think that's the key. We need to work more as a team, another group of people having their specialities.
And that doesn't only apply to serverless development.
No.
Definitely not.
But
Definitely
I
not.
think it's
But
even
it
more
is,
applies.
somewhat of a movement that we put more effort into that way of working instead of
But I think you
traditional
need it
software
more for
development.
functions, else
Mhm.
it
because
will-
it's
it
too
will
dangerous
spiral
to
down
go
control.
bad quickly.
But it's maybe needed more, but it is easier in a certain level because it's only certain areas you need to focus on and not the whole stack anymore, right? You don't have to also monitor the infrastructure
No.
as well. So you have to do more work in the application area and that monitoring the actual business logic.
Yeah,
but
it's more like business slices.
Mhm.
Yeah,
exactly.
and you're more responsible for everything. We saw a great talk last time. So you're more responsible of the whole thing. So if you can go faster, you can build faster, but that means you can make more security threats faster. And we seen a brilliant talk last time of someone, it was just a function that gets in an email and gets out the resume and puts it in the DynamoDB. And this guy live within 5 minutes got the whole dump of the DynamoDB out of it. And we can go faster to production. And if you take this slow monolithic security thing, what you still want security, but you need to have a security mindset also. And you need to have an ops mindset, and you need there's a lot
So
more
there's
stuff.
more skills in different sets than typical than just the development thing of it.
Because the
You
feedback
can
is
write
much
the C#
faster.
code. Maybe everyone can do it, but there's more stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also why serverless isn't just about functions. Yeah, it's still about the whole integration to deliver a certain value. It's more just about the code. So that's why you still need all of the people around to make the right decisions.
So I think that we are already getting
31 minutes.
31 minutes. So
let's have some small questions at the end.
some small. I just have one question, and that is more. I actually have two questions for you. But
I have one question as well.
okay, so the first one, and
We can
you
go
also
over
say,
time.
well, we have covered a lot of subjects already. But what is the thing that we didn't touch on that you say? That is we are talking here. We definitely need to touch on that subject here.
Serverless battles. What did we miss?
I think
Well,
documentation.
during the talks, we mentioned several aspects, and one of them was how nice was the portal usage and documentation. But I'm not sure.
Performance maybe.
And the SDK. So for me, those two things are how fast can I pick it up and learn it. So theoretically, the Netherlands should all be world champion soccer, right? We're not, so we can make that's the way. What we say, right? You can theoretically check what's the better, but you need to work with it. So how good is the documentation? How fast can I learn something? And I think that is something we didn't really touch on.
Yeah, that's true.
And I always look at documentation and how easy is it to use the SDK.
Okay.
That's
But nobody reads the documentation, so how easy is the SDK?
So which one should we?
Do you have an opinion on that, or can you quickly elaborate? on that?
For the Azure part, I'm a .NET developer, so for me it felt really quite natural to and a very easy entry to use the Azure Azure Functions SDK. I only touched the .NET part, but you can also do it now in JavaScript and TypeScript and Python, and so it offers more and more languages, and I did not get into those. But certainly for that part, it's quite easy to get into. And still going back to documentation, there's also quite some samples on GitHub and stuff, so you can easily clone a repo or two and see lots of samples which are working. So I think it's easy to get into.
Yeah, for the AWS part, it's tied in together. So I had a lot of trouble with, for instance, API gateway events. So doing request reply on the API gateway. It's custom built by AWS. So going to the extensive documentation that crits you, really, it's a lot. Everything is there, but it's not fast. You cannot find faster documentation. And then you go to the Google part, which at first there wasn't a lot of documentation, but when you go in, they use standard libraries. So they use standard libraries to do.
Request
I forget the function for JavaScript, but they're standard in everyone uses them for Node, for instance. And I
so
like
if you're a
that
Node developer, it's really easy to start.
They're always using this, so I'm not a real good Node developer. Else I would know it, but You know, and that's nice about Google. They use standard libraries to plug it in, and AWS build it themselves, while that gets a bit quirky at the start.
And, well, always when I see the comparison between these platforms, they're always looking at performance. Is that something you looked into as well?
We borrowed quite a lot of data that was done by a very good Azure MVP, and he did some monitoring over the last couple of months. And there it shows that AWS was performing the best speed-wise.
Even Java better than Node, which was for me was like, okay.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, but you can also see other cloud providers like Azure now having different offerings. So they have the consumption plan and the full app service plan, but now they also have a premium plan, which allows you to have one hot instance, which will always be available.
I like that one.
Yeah, to reduce the cold start effect. Yeah. So there are different solutions by different cloud providers to tackle that. So that's interesting to see the differences.
This week I was looking into some serverless architectures. For me, it's the last question. It's like high availability. Like in the cloud, we just create a function, or we just create a resource, and we expect it to work. So, do you see any patterns for high availability there? Can you run stuff in parallel in multiple regions, or how are you going to cope with creating high available applications using serverless technology?
Yeah, it's not something I really touched upon yet, but it had the whole event-driven nature certainly lends to it, I think, quite easily to have different things running in different regions, for instance, or in different resource groups. So I think it is a good fit to do it, especially if you take into account that you should program and think about resilience and failure anyway. Yeah.
What I would like to know, because I don't know, is what it does with your cap theorem, right? You can have, usually for the database, you cannot be consistent, available, and persistent. Was it persistent? No, partitioned. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you talk about high availability over several regions. So is it then partitioned, or is it then?
I don't care. I want to have a solution for my customers, and I want it to always be there.
Yeah. So that's the high availability. So what part do you want to lose? Consistency, or I don't know if that still works. How the cap theorem works with the high availability of the serverless functions. That's just something I generally. It's a nice question to know.
Yeah,
it's I don't have the answer because it was a
theoretical. Indeed, but especially when we talk about function servers, there are very short-lived things anyway. So if they're short-lived in one region or short-lived in the other region, I mean that's
a lot of stuff is async. So if it doesn't start and it starts later, it will just continue. So you mostly have a delay, so eventual consistency or stuff like that. But you get that out of the box. Okay. Cool.
Learning pointers? Yeah. I know you, Mark. When I got to know you, I think 3 years back, you didn't do anything with Azure functions. Now you are. I think
nobody was, right?
Channel.
They were there.
I know that Mark picked it up from the start and really dove into it. So, what are your learning points? What are great resources to start with? How to get started? How to get up to speed here?
I think GitHub is really a good source. So most of the stuff that Microsoft does is in GitHub and in open source, and they provide really good samples. So they really have some specific sample repositories where you can just clone it and get going. So I would definitely recommend that. And you always do need a bit of persistency to get into things, because you have some new learnings to do. And especially when I started, a lot of things were in preview, and then there were sometimes mismatched with runtimes and packages and that sort of stuff, which is not currently happening anymore, luckily. But that's the risk of venturing into any new technology.
And go to your YouTube channel to learn more.
Thank you for promoting it.
We will add the link to the video later. So do you have any things that people should see, read?
Well, I think
either serverless, maybe DDD wise.
DDD wise, there's a lot, but I think the most important part about this is find a meetup, see if they give hands-on, because hands-on is generally the best way to learn it. And I organize DDD in the Netherlands. We always try to do hands-on because it's, if you've seen the book, this big book, and if you look at the, especially AWS documentation again, it's probably this book if you print it out. But there's so much, and you can start. But if you go to a hands-on, you get a goal. You learn together, and that's more fun. And and that's how we actually started all this, just by being here, talking, and then what problem should we solve? So we gave ourselves a problem to solve, and do it the same way. And I think that's there's a lot of books. Just Google it. But learning with someone is much more fun. Learning from each other, and especially someone from I came from AWS.
Yeah, different directions.
Different direction gives so many insights. So much fun.
Cool.
That's
Okay, well, that's a nice call to action for the people watching. So just go hands-on and try to learn the stuff for yourself. And on any of the platforms, I think it's just a matter of personal flavor as well for most people. Well, I think we can wrap up the show for this week.
Yes.
Well, we will be back next week. We don't know who will be the guest next week. We will probably post that on Twitter tomorrow or the day after. So, well, hopefully you'll be here again next week, same time. Wish you all good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. So, see ya.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Now my remote's not working.